live. Well, thanks for joining us, Voltage, and thanks for joining us, viewers.
Thanks for
Um,
having me.
so today we're going to talk to Voltage, who's a Mountain Dew League veteran. He's played, main opper during as far as I understand, your primary role during your career. And you played with, multiple of the like rising talents that sort of made a name for themselves in 2020. Played with some of the most known NA teams, your Chaoses, your Triumphs, and these days you're involved with Michigan Tech. I didn't mention that you want to bring up, or does that sort of cover it?
No, that sounds about right. I think most notably, people would probably remember me from my time on either Triumph or Chaos. That's most likely what people know me by. But
Hmm.
yeah, sounds good.
Awesome. Yeah, so if you're just wondering why you should be watching today, then we're gonna dig into your history with players such as Grim, Steel, Xepa, and we're also going to dig into your sort of insight in NACS. Obviously, there's been a lot of sort of rumbling going on in the
Mm-hmm.
NACS scene with players moving to Valorant, organizations moving out of NA. So, I mean, you definitely have first-hand experience with this. And then we're going to dig into, the usual stuff that we like to talk about with pro players, like how to improve as a player and how to become a better player or even go pro. And then we're going to take some questions from the community to see, so you guys get a chance to get in on the action as well. Cool. So let's just start a little bit by covering your history as a player. Some people might know it, but I'm sure there's also details in there that people can learn from. So, do you remember starting off? Do you remember sort of the point of when you sort of thought like, oh shit, I actually have a chance to become pro here? What do you think was the sort of defining moment for that?
Yeah. So actually, my first ever team was just kind of with friends, just as a joke, or just like they randomly messaged me. They're like, "Hey, we're making a CEVO team and a CEVO scrim team, and just wanted to try it out." And ever since we started scrimming and stuff, I was hooked, and I knew that it was something that I wanted to do. I just didn't. I've never had, which is a common pattern I'll probably talk about through all of my career, is I've always had like confidence issues in my abilities in games. So at that point, I had no clue if I was good or not, and everyone was telling me like, "Dude, you're actually like really good," and we would constantly scrim these better teams, and that's how I would get some recognition. And eventually, I just got with a good group of people, which was at the time, I believe it was me, Snakes, MOTM, or no, sorry, it was me, Thief, who is now on LG for Valorant. Um, who else? Crazy Legs was another person on the team. Tacitus, sorry, who is on the coach for Triumph, and Grim, which we would probably all know.
Yeah.
And from that point on, we just started grinding it out, and I knew as soon as with that roster just how good they were that we were gonna just grind it out. And I was by far, which is strangely, I was the star player on that team. And Grim was kind of like it was. I actually remember when I first joined the team, I'd say yeah, that was actually the point where I realized like I've got this because we were in Maine, I think, and I was like hard carrying the team, like just absolutely destroying everybody, and I
Right.
actually had the mindset of, oh, I'm kind of like better than these guys. Like I might see if I can get on a better team, but then I realized that that's just not the right mentality to have. And we ended up making two roster moves, which ended up being bringing in Snakes and MOTM, and then the rest is history from Broken Alliance onwards, where we made that crazy E-League run where we beat CLG, and just from then on, I think it was kind of just some luck that I was able to get with those guys. Like we just all found each other and all ended up being insanely good. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I've really only been on 2, 3 teams, just all the same players.
Yeah. Well, I guess you found like a core that sort of worked, and then you stuck with it. Which, to be
Oh yeah.
honest, it feels like that's a little bit of an unusual path to pro because it feels like it's very frequent that you um, that you have, people like, especially these days, a lot of people make it in for FPL, but a lot of the amateur teams and even the tier 2, tier 3 teams just keep breaking up. I mean, you have different ambitions, you have different sort of ideas of how to play the game. So it definitely feels like it's kind of rare that you made it so far with the same players. Do you think there's any secret to that, or is it just that like you were super lucky with the team chemistry, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a combination of luck and just dedication because two most dedicated players I've ever played with in my entire life were Grim and MOTM. Like 100%. Like MOTM used to always tweet out the stuff about like, oh, you will never outwork me, and that was just honestly true. Like people would joke about that stuff because a lot of people notoriously do that. They tweet out some like motivational stuff and then don't actually end up doing it. But I mean, that guy would literally play. He'd constantly have 120, 140 hours in the past 2 weeks, just constantly grinding. So like he earned it like crazy. But even though Grim grinded as well, I think like he just has that natural talent that some people just don't have. I'm not saying that MOTM doesn't have it, but maybe not as much as Grim, because as you can see, that kid is going places. So I think
Yeah,
it was very
absolutely.
unorthodox on how I made pro, and I tell that to people like
Yeah,
whenever anyone asks me, they say like, "Hey, what's your tips for making pro?" I think FPL and Rank S and stuff. It's a good system to go through, and it's a really good way to get your name out there. But I wouldn't bank on making FPL, doing well in FPL, and then getting picked up by a pro team because that's very rare. That's even more rare than what I did. So I definitely would recommend just getting through that pug system and getting to FPL, but don't be super picky with the teams you end up wanting to get on. Make sure you get some reps under your belt in MDL, maybe get a season or two in, and that's where you can really like show off the kind of player you are because FPL just doesn't really do that.
right. Um, do you think like obviously we've sort of scraped the surface of it a little bit, but like is there anything that you think you did during sort of your rise to pro that maybe others don't, which sort of was a big part of why you made it while others might not?
Yeah, I think I did a wonderful job. So I think most teams when they play together, they just kind of see it as like, all right, guys, let's just get on. We're gonna practice, and then they don't really talk to each other. They don't really hang out with each other. It's just kind of a friendly thing. But we really developed like a family there. Like, I mean, even today, I still talk to Grim every single day. Like, I've been to Snakes' house like 5 or 6 times. Like, we have all we all got really really close, and I think when you have that trust with everybody, because that's the biggest thing that happens in a team, is the way it goes down, especially in NA, is one person on the team starts talking bad behind somebody else's back, then trust is lost, and then the whole team chemistry is just off because when you're playing, you don't have that trust for each other. You don't There's just always that turmoil. But we never had that at all with our whole team because we were always so close with each other that if there was a problem, we just talked about it. So I think the reason why I was successful is I found a good group of people, regardless of their skill. We still would have probably made it to MDL 100% without the raw talent that they had, just because we were just all around a better team outside of the game in just every single way. Like we were able to get close with each other, we were able to respect each other, and I think that is the hardest thing for people to do in NA because everyone just has these egos because I don't know, I guess they have decent pug stats or something, so they think that makes them insane at this game. And so every time they get on a team, it's always a competition of I need to do as good as possible on this team to get on a better team, right? And that's just not none of us thought that way. It was always how can we make the team the best we possibly can, not how can I be the best possible player to get on a better team. And because of that, we just put all that time into being a better team rather than being better individuals. So we just completely were outclassing all these teams because they
Right.
just didn't have an answer for it because they all were just
Yeah.
pugging all day.
Definitely, I think like the point you're making is super underrated, especially in Counter Strike because I mean a lot of like even though I played a lot of Counter Strike, I have even more experience in more sort of like the business area and teams, and I mean, they're like everyone is only talking about teams and building trust in teams, building a good strong culture, building tight teams. It's usually how small startups beat huge corporations. And I think this is a super underrated point that you're making in Counter Strike, because everybody's just thinking about like, oh shit, I'm gonna frag out, I'm gonna go completely nuts, and everyone's changing players back and forth. No one's thinking about the really hardcore values. That's like, okay, I mean, it's actually a team game, and being a team goes way beyond the game itself. I mean, you can't just focus on like, oh, here's the strategies that we have on the server. You also need to, as you said, like, I mean, spend some time actually getting to know these guys and
Oh yeah.
building trust. And I mean, if you look at it, like the most successful team today is Astralis. I mean, that core has been together for ages, and like they aren't really known for changing pieces around. I guess up until recently when they tried to make a 10-man roster, but
Yeah.
that's besides the point.
Well,
Um, but all right, cool. And I really agree with you there. So like, if you think back, like we're gonna get into your practice routine today and like during your pro times. But I wanted to ask first, like, I mean, if you think back to before you sort of went pro and when you were on the grind, like, how did you sort of practice that back then, and like, what what's maybe the main difference between now and then, and like, is there anything you wish you would have known practice wise then, like prioritize differently or anything like that?
yeah. So I think back then, I mean, really the best way to get better, like it is important to do like demo stuff and really try and work on yourself tactically. But if you don't have the mechanics to back it up, it's really hard to just look at a demo, try and replicate something, and expect it to work. So you need to find a good balance. And I think like there's the warm up servers is what they're called on like the community browser, and that is like you can just sit there and grind that all day, and that is genuinely probably one of the best ways to improve mechanically, because everyone thinks that just, oh, if I just spam grind pugs, that's the best way to get better. It I mean, it is and it isn't, right? Because with pugs you can argue, oh well, I'm working on my mechanics and my game sense at the same time, but are you really learning from a pug? Like is it really worth that time? And a lot of the times I think you're better off just at least getting in an hour of two or an hour or two of DM every single day. And then if you want to go pug, go ahead. Maybe you do, it doesn't have to be an hour straight or 2 hours straight. This is what I used to do. I would, DM for maybe 30 minutes to an hour, maybe play a couple pugs, then go back to DMing. Like you don't want to always just spam 6 pugs straight, because it's gonna burn you out. You're gonna get burnt out quick, and you're not gonna learn as much as if you were to take that time, DM, and then maybe instead of spamming 6 pugs in a row, play 3, relax, watch some pro CS, watch some demos. Like, find ways to just incorporate everything within a day. You don't have to do it in just pug, 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 pug. You're gonna get better slower than if you were to maximize your time. I think a lot of people think, oh, I just need to put as much time in as possible, but in reality, it's not how much time you put in, it's how effectively you use the time that you put in. And I think that is what a lot of people don't realize. They think, oh, I have 120 hours in the past 2 weeks. Why am I struggling? Am I in a slump? Am I burnt out? And it's like, it's because you're not using your time wisely. You need to think about how effective are these 120 hours? Because if all that's DM and you're struggling making decisions, like, you found your problem, right? You don't need to DM more. You've already DM'd enough. So it's all about identifying your problems and also just using your time wisely. And I think I did a good job of that, because I understood that early on.
Yeah, I can imagine that really elevated your development as a player, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because like what you touch upon is like a huge chunk of why I started Letify, a while back, because like that's essentially what I did when I was trying to go pro, like just grinding and playing pugs. Like I played a lot, but I didn't play smart. I didn't practice smart. And then I've fought to like traditional sports, which I did a lot as well. And like traditional sports, you're forced into this mindset that you're describing now. Like, okay, I mean, sure, you can spend a lot of hours, but how are you practicing? Like, are you using the deliberate practice, and are you actually working on your weaknesses? Are you actually doing things like no football team just goes and plays, pugs essentially.
Right. Yeah.
They would set up practices that would sort of isolate skills and try to practice specific scenarios. And I think like it's a shame because a lot of people when they're very young probably don't find this mindset as you seem to have done. Like I think the majority probably don't realize this until they get older, and then maybe the chance to go pro is a little bit, gone by. So definitely, I think that's also like a very good and underrated point. Like, okay, I mean, sure, work hard, but also work smart, essentially. Um, right. So when it comes to today, let's go to your practice routine today. What does your practice routine today look like in general?
Yeah. So because I am playing against like significantly lower competition than I have previously, I don't have to put like as much emphasis on the demo aspect and everything. So currently my routine is just like IDM probably. I've been trying to get into the habit, which this is you don't have to do this much. I just am strict on myself when it comes to the mechanics side of the game. So I'm attempting to do 1,000 aimbots kills a day, which takes about like 2-3 hours. Or sorry, not aimbots. DM kills. Aimbots that would take like 10 minutes. But uh, yeah, so that I do that because we actually when we were at our peak on Triumph, we called it the one Grim challenge because he would always get 1K aimbots kills. Or, I don't know why I keep saying aimbots. DM kills a day in the warm up server, and obviously we were like, he's putting all the time in. We realized that this is, it's now or never. Basically, we need to put all this time in. So every single person on the team did 1K DM kills a day, and I felt that personally I was at my peak when we were doing that. So I just adopted that and I just kept doing it. And I think it's really good because it's a good way to train your reflexes, your muscle memory, because really that's what DM is for. I mean, that's all you're doing is training your muscle memory, especially as an opper. Like that's flicking is super important and you can only train that by doing it more. You're not just going to randomly all of a sudden hit your flicks one day. You have to practice those and you have to be good about that. I think mine is a little unorthodox because I actually don't opt DM. I do like very slightly. I'll get maybe like 50 kills every day with it, but I'm I my whole goal in my career was I did not want to be and not to throw shade here, but everyone attributed JDM to being an op one trick, right? Everyone always said that he can really only op, and I didn't want to be that kind of player because at the time when I was up and coming, that's like all the oppers in NA were. They were just they were only good at opping, and you gave them a rifle, and they were kind of useless. And I always wanted my rifle to be on par with everybody else's on the team because I feel like why should I like we shouldn't always have to rely on me getting an op in order for me to be useful. And because of that, I think probably for the longest time I was the most versatile opper in NA. And I think that especially showed whenever I started like on Triumph when we would play these teams, like we would edge out close games against teams that had these one trick oppers because I was able to rifle. So we could be a lot more successful with less money than them. And I think that is like something that's very underrated for oppers. Like don't just sit there and focus on opping all day because think about it, if you take a span of 100 games, you're probably going to have a rifle way more than you're going to have an op in those games or SMG, pistol, whatever. So if you only op DM, you're cutting your chances of success down like a bunch because you're not going to be using the op realistically that much. You can't have an ideal game every game where you have the op 7 rounds and a half and then just have an op the whole game. It's just not going to happen. Especially as you play better and better teams, they're going to do a good job of keeping your money good. So it's just really important that you stay versatile. And that's what I do with my routine is I just rifle DM like crazy and make sure that my rifle is where I want it to be.
Definitely. And like, do you think so? Like, we're actually outside of TM. Is there anything else you spend a lot of time on or focus on, or is there anything that sort of like occasionally makes it into your practice routine? Like, oh yeah, I need to refresh this every now and then, or
I do. So in terms of stuff outside of like just pure mechanics, almost I'd say about every other day I'll go in to our practice server that we have, and I'll just switch between maps and just make sure I remember every single nade that I throw. There's no like I don't. In my opinion, there's no excuse to miss nades. Like it's not. I mean, I know some people have like a hard time remembering things, but in my opinion, that just means that you have to put more time into it. Like if you, it's just the same thing with everything, right? If your mechanics are lacking, put more time into your mechanics. If you aren't remembering your nades, then you just got to put more time into your nades. It's not. No one's inherently just gonna like. You can outwork people even if they have natural talent. So,
sure.
yeah, I definitely do a lot of nade practice, and just finding new nades. I mean, Sheikh Zula and I used to literally sit in a server. Like when we were on Triumph, we would practice. We would get out, and from like for about 2 hours, we just sit in a server and just try and find new nades, and just think about new things that we could do. So and I think it's super underrated because if you just play like everybody else, you're never gonna be the best.
Definitely. So it's like, what about positions? I guess for you, maybe you don't switch up your positions as much as maybe a lot of lower tier teams, as you like switch between different teams a lot. But like, if you think back to, for example, the last time you approached a new position, like, oh, now I'm suddenly playing here on CT. Like, how would you approach that, and how would you learn and get comfortable with that playing that position? Mainly on the T side or CT side, I would assume in this case.
So I feel like I have a pretty good insight on this, because even though I haven't necessarily had to switch up much positions, I think a lot of people don't think about the right things when they try a new position. So, if you're switching up your position, obviously your first things you look at are, okay, well, first of all, I just need to get more reps into it, get comfortable playing it. And that's good. I think you should do that before you even watch demos. Like maybe watch a demo or two on the spot just to kind of see some things you can mix up and just see rough basic reactions, but get those reps in. Once you get a decent feel for it, that is where you need to start thinking about, okay, what are people doing against me that makes me uncomfortable? Right? So a lot of the times people just be like, "Oh, they smoked me off this round. I didn't know what to do." Well, don't just think about that of like, "Okay, well, I just hope they don't smoke me next round." You got to think about, "Okay, what are things that I can do if they do this?" Right? You need to always be changing up what you're doing and adjusting. And I also think that something people don't think about is when you're playing a position, help your team. And I say this very broadly, but I'm going to go into more depth. People play positions and they think, oh, this made me really uncomfortable when they did that. So tell your teammate who plays the other team's position on that side of the map, say, hey, if this person if the CT plays like this, the way that I play it, do this because it makes me super uncomfortable. I don't know what to do against it. Right. So it's all about, helping your team on T side, even though you're on CT side. You know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
if someone makes you super uncomfortable on the map, or someone throws a crazy smoke that you saw and you're like, I have no clue what I'm supposed to do against this. I don't think people know what to do. Throw the smoke when you're on T side and just see how the other team reacts to it. Maybe they find a crazy reaction to it, and then now all of a sudden okay, now I know how to play against it. That's what scrims are for. It's for trying things, just figuring out answers to questions you have. Like that's the biggest thing about scrims.
It's sort of obvious that you have a very like team first mentality compared to maybe a lot of other players, especially on the lower tiers, like team thinking amateurs now, where people are very individual focused. Um, would you say uh, like one thing that I'm always curious on is like, okay, like when you should be finding a team, and like because it seems like this team based mentality has really benefited you in your career. Um, and today a lot of people go for FPL and these sort of things. So like, is there something, is there sort of threshold where like, okay, if you really want to develop as a player, then find a team around this level, and what should you be thinking about when you start getting into teams?
Yeah, I think I don't know. I think it's pretty ineffective to just look at a certain like skill threshold and say like, okay, this is where you should start a team, because realistically it's all about the time you can put in. Like if you can't put the time in, right, and you only have time for maybe a couple pugs or just a little bit of DM every single day, probably not going to help you by joining a team, or at least not
Sure.
be as efficient as once you free up your time. So I think really it's just about how much time can you put in. Now, if you have the time to join a team, I think you should try and join one as soon as possible, because scrims and matches are the fastest way to improve, especially if you're consistently playing better teams. Because again, it goes back to that idea that, when people say, oh, you get better by playing against better teams, it's for those reasons that I talked about, where when you do something, say you throw some smokes, someone does something to disrupt it, you can start doing that now when they throw the smokes. So you're learning from things that other teams are doing. And that's why I think it's super important to join a team like pretty much as soon as you can. The hardest part is especially in North America, I mean, again, a lot of the mentalities here are just, oh, well, we want somebody who has more experience or has played at a higher level than we're even at. Like if you're playing against, if you try and join an open team, a lot of the times they're like, oh, you don't have any experience in open. Well, we're not going to pick you up. And it's like, well, if somebody has experience, 4 seasons of open, why would you want to pick somebody up who's been stuck in open and hasn't gotten out? Like there's probably an issue there, right? So it's all about, I I personally think that you should join and make teams with friends, just to start off, and then just play some scrims together. See what happens. Like get into the groove of competitive CS by taking it slow, and don't just try and instantly hop on a team, because you're gonna, I mean, honestly, if you just go into a random team, you're probably going to have some bad experiences and it's going to rub you the wrong way, and you're probably not going to want to play competitive CS for a bit, because it's just the toxicity of lower level Counter-Strike. It just
Yeah.
happens, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have that one teammate that's, you know, really toxic or whatever. And that's why, so it's important that like you want to attribute competitive CS to something fun and enjoyable. Because as soon as you get into a situation where it's no fun, you're going to hate it. It's going to make you hate all of
Yeah.
competitive CS. And it's, yeah, super
No,
important to
definitely.
just make friends.
It's actually interesting because so before we jump into NACS, because we had a question from the community about like how to get into a team and how to start up a team, and I think it sounds like okay, your idea is maybe go through your friend circle first and sort of rather than joining a random team. Is there any other quick tips that you have around like, okay, so now that you've sort of started a team, if be it with your friends or you joined a team, like how are there any things that they should really think about? Like, okay, now that we just started, we should start here, or we should focus on these things the first few months, maybe.
Yeah, so defaults I think are the most important thing in Counter-Strike. For example, our team, like I run basically a purely default system. Like I can tell you we probably have a couple strats that I don't even call them. It's pretty much entirely default based and reaction based. And I think the biggest thing you should do as when you're just starting out as a team is people, they really want to just like watch demos, and when they watch the demos all they do is like, oh, that's a cool execute, I'm going to copy that and use it. But you need to think about, okay, why did they even do the execute in the first place? They didn't just throw it because they're like, oh, cool execute, let's just throw this and hope it wins. That's not what happened. So you need to watch if you're watching demos, look for tendencies, look for defaults. Like getting your default down is the most important thing. Like if you can't even take map control, how do you expect to execute? So you need to make sure that like if you guys start a brand new team with your friends, just get your defaults going. Like get comfortable playing with each other, get comfortable playing off of each other. That is the biggest thing. Like you might even have a day where you just go in and say, okay, I want everyone before they do anything to just call what you're doing and tell your teammate like, hey, I'm going to flash for you. Like let's try flashing for each other today. Like you need to work on that team communication and working together as a unit, because if you don't do that, like it's just going to be 5 players playing on a team as opposed to 5 people working together. So I think those are the most important things.
That makes a lot of sense. So we're gonna deep dive into NACS a little bit, and then we're gonna talk about some of the players you played with, and then after that we're gonna take community questions. So I'll just let and a viewer know that, like, if you want to ask a question for Voltage, then post it in chat now, and the team will pick it up, and then we'll get to those at the end. So yeah, NACS. What sort of your opinion or hot take on the current state of NACS?
I think Valorant definitely. I don't know. I have a interesting viewpoint on this because I think yeah, it took a lot of talent away from us, from the NACS scene, but a lot of the talent that left were the ones that were the reason why competitive NACS wasn't developing, because there was, as a lot of people, as may have seen from ESIC or on Twitter, a good majority of the players that went to Valorant from the NA scene have maybe thrown a couple matches and were very, very detrimental to the growth of NACS, because there was just, you literally have matches where you would look on HLTV, from a player, from my perspective, I'd look at it on HLTV and I'm like, okay, I know neither of these teams practice. I know both of them are probably throwing, so this match is pointless. Why? It was just frustrating to watch, because these are all spots that are being taken up by people who, this could be an advanced team that's been working super hard, and instead it's just these people that are just trying to cash a paycheck by, you know, basically scamming in Oregon, pretending like they're doing stuff. So I do think that the current state of NACS, even though right now it seems pretty grim, I think that this is better in the long run, personally, because we got rid of all the people that were just basically stuck in MDL permanently. Like, there was a bunch of people that 6 or 7 straight seasons at MDL. Like, if you're not, I'm not saying that they don't have a chance to make it out of pro or to make it into pro. Like, that's definitely possible, but they really weren't on the path to go pro, and they weren't willing to put the time in to go pro anyway, because they were just like, oh, I can make this much money just throwing games. Why should I sit here and try and go pro? So I really think it's kind of a good thing that a lot of these players went to Valorant. And I think this is, like I said, in the long run, it's going to be good. But for now, it's, as you can tell, it's looking a little bit rough.
Sure. And I mean, what you described sounds super depressing. So in that sense,
Yeah.
it would definitely be for the better. So like, speaking of Valorant, obviously, I think there's a lot of people wondering if you consider the move to Valorant.
I did. I actually tweeted out, I think, a couple months ago, that I was, if given the right opportunity, I was interested. Because I find the game fun to play casually. I'm pretty good at it. I think I played a couple ranked games at the beginning, and I was like Immortal 2. Like, I probably could have gotten Radiant if I just played. But I just, I've never been a fan of abilities in tactical shooters. Or in FPS games. I just feel I think it's good that Valorant has them, because I think Valorant is actually a pretty interesting game, but it's just not my thing. It's, and some people, like I said, I don't think it's a bad game because of something I don't like, because that's just my personal opinion. But overall, I can objectively say that it's a good game, and I think it's the first real threat we've had as an esport to Counter-Strike. But I mean, again, I think it's going to be like every other game, where I think the player base will stay consistent, because casually, like I said, it's really fun to play. But I don't think it'll ever overtake CS as like a full-on esport, like viewership wise and everything.
Yeah. No, it's funny because I think, at least in Counter-Strike, a lot of people agree with you and like almost exactly echo the sentiment. I had so many friends who, at the start of Valorant, was like, "Oh shit, it's so fun to play," and then the deeper they get into it, it's like, "Yeah, but something's not
Yeah.
there."
Mhm.
All right. So like, to what extent do you think like ECA increased the prize pools of the cash cups? Like, to what extent do you think that will help the NA scene?
I think it'll actually help a lot. Because a lot of teams, again, it kind of goes back to that. Like, there were teams that, there was basically 3 types of teams in MDL when I was playing. There was the teams that were just kind of, they didn't care, they were throwing whatever. The second teams were just kind of 5 FPL stars, 5 rank S players that just grinded these hubs and then played a little bit of MDL matches on the side just to maybe get an org, maybe get a little extra money. And then there were the teams that actually tried. They actually wanted to get better. They wanted to do all this stuff. So I think this is actually really good for those teams that wanted to be teams, but they were like, we're just 5 FPL players. I can make more money playing FPL. Let's just make a team together, have some fun in MDL, whatever. So now those players that kind of have that money-driven mentality, they have a way to kind of harness their team ability and play in these cash cups and start to actually improve and use it as practice. And it not being necessarily oh well, I could be playing FPL instead, or I could be playing rank S instead. So I think it's a really good thing. I mean, obviously, the more money that comes into NACS, the better. But
Sure.
I think it's also a good motivator for those players that don't feel like it's worth it to grind on a team and they'd rather just play these hubs, because the more money that comes in for the leagues, the more people that are going to play it. I mean,
Right.
like, you think the seasons that I played MDL, if you played 1 week of FPL, I think you won more money than if you won MDL.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
just like,
It's a bit skewed.
yeah.
So like you touched upon, like it seems in your mind a lot of the Valorant departure was good. Was there any particular like Valorant departure which you think actually really hurt the scene? Like that was a big loss.
I mean, obviously Nitro, I think,
Sure.
because I think that him being gone from Liquid may have been like a necessity. But I do think that he could have made teams like EG like significantly better. I mean, I've never really thought too highly of Stanislaw, because like if you look at the different rosters he's had, like you look at the 4 other players on that team and you're like, dude, how is that team not better? Right? Like
Right.
how, like, that team they have such good mechanics and just some of the best like individual players, and they just always are underwhelming for the talent that they have. I mean, EG now, even though that they're pretty solid, it's still pretty underwhelming. Obviously, you have the Chaos guys. Any that team dying was just sad. They were
Sure.
just reaching their peak, and they were, or not reaching their peak, but they were just getting their names out there, just starting to make everyone realize that, like, hey, we're a force to be reckoned with. And then Chaos was just like, oh, can't afford you anymore, sorry.
Yeah,
So that's
it's
just,
like a very sad way to go as well. It's not because
mhm.
the players were like, oh, fuck it, let's give up. It's
Yeah. And I think recently, I mean, obviously, MC's got a special place in my heart because he was my
sure.
coach and teammate for past 3-4 years, whatever. But I'm telling you, I don't think that there's a single coach in North America that could ever match anything that he ever did. I mean, that guy
So
is,
let's talk MC for a moment. Like, what do you think? Like, what is it he brings? Like, obviously he's worked with a lot of the big talents in NA, and I think he's gone a lot under the radar as well, to be honest. So like, what is it he brings to the team? Maybe particularly as a coach, but also as a player, I guess.
yeah. So as a coach, I mean, he is very, very good at pattern recognition. So if he's ever watching a demo or anything, he instantly picks up on tells. Like if a team throws an extra flash on this and he knows that it's going to be that strat, he'll recognize it right away in a match. Like he'll know instantly. Like I said, his pattern recognition is insane, and that's what honestly 90% of CS is nowadays. When you're thinking about things tactically, it's what are they doing? How can I disrupt it? So if you recognize patterns, you can easily disrupt it because you just you know the pattern. You know what they're gonna do. It's basic CS to just know, okay, what counters it. Um, so I think that's like the biggest thing that he brings to the table, but also the fact that like he is not afraid to just kind of tell it how it is. Um, and if someone's slacking, if there's an issue, like everyone just has insane respect for him because of the things he's done. Like Chaos, for example, you know, everyone knows Steel is this big personality, but he had full respect for Matt. Like Matt had the final say in everything, with Matt being MCE. Um, and everything, his decision was always the final decision. Like it did not matter what was going. He never, like, they would have disagreements of like, okay, I think maybe we should do it this way, but in a match or in anything, he always had the final say. Like all of our pistols were by Matt. Like he is just I don't know how to describe it, but like I just genuinely don't think that there's another coach in North America that will ever be able to have as much impact as he's had.
Sure.
Just not at all.
And obviously, it sounds also like the role that coaches maybe should have, but very rarely actually have in esports, compared to like a lot of the traditional sports where coaches have a lot more authority, I guess. But all right, so like while we're on the topic of these various players and coaches you worked with, so I mean, obviously a big one that everyone is buzzing about now is Grim, who's now on Liquid. I mean, you played together like 319 maps, which is kind of nuts. I guess more than most people play ever have on HLTV.
Yep.
So like, what was it like playing with Grim back in like your first team together was Sore, I think. Like, what was it like playing together with him all the way back then? And also like to add on to that, what changes have you seen in him that maybe also enabled him to eventually be on the position he's in now with Liquid?
Yeah, so I have told him from the beginning he could 100% come on here, attest to it. No doubt in my mind. I was always saying that he was going to make it. Like he had multiple times where he was thinking about quitting, and I always told him like I have never seen mechanics like yours in my entire life. Like I have never seen somebody so consistent, and just like the shots he would hit consistently were insane. And like the only time I would ever see anything that was even similar to what he would do is like when I'd watch Simple's stream. Like watching Simple, I'd be like, okay, this is somebody who's as consistent as Grim. Like even back in the main days, like he was just always disgustingly good. And but I think his biggest weak point for the longest time was, and I think it was actually the biggest weak point of everybody on the team, on Soar, was that MCE was a very micro caller, so he would micromanage everything. So a lot of us got into the habit of not even having to think about the game. So our job was just to go and shoot people, and he would do the thinking for us. And because of that, he really struggled as an individual when it came to decision making because we just didn't really have to think for the longest time. And I eventually kind of pushed him to like think more, trust his decisions, because he would be too afraid, like, oh, well, what if my decision's the wrong decision, whatever. And eventually I just kept telling him, like, hey, if you want to do something, like, do it. Like, ask questions later. Like, that's the whole point of being a player in scrimming, is like finding things that'll work. If, testing an idea, if it doesn't work, then don't do it again. And he started to push his boundaries, and it gained his confidence because he started to realize, like, okay, I would make this decision and it was a good play. Like 9 times out of 10, it was a good play that he made. And eventually he started to realize, okay, these ideas that I have are actually good ideas. I just need to start doing them and keep doing them. And because of that, he would always, dog on himself of being like, a dumb aimer or like just a turret is what people would say. But he realized that, okay, I'm actually like smarter. I'm capable of making these plays. Like, he would watch streams and he would be like, okay, yeah, I would have made that play like 9 times out of
Right.
10. So that really, really helped him like gain confidence. And that was probably more towards Triumph, I think, when he started doing that. So it took him a while to get there,
Yeah.
but it was from that point on. I mean, I told him, I'm like, dude, it's literally just a matter of time before somebody picks you up. Like,
Yeah.
I told him that, I'm like, I'm surprised you haven't been picked up already. And then he had the MIBR game, and I knew instantly. I was like, yep, that's finally, your people are gonna
Rip.
see it. Yep, people are gonna see it, and then they did, and then here came Liquid. So
Screwed everything up. But
yeah.
apart from the 1,000 kills deathmatch Grim challenge, was there anything else you learned from Grim while you were playing with him?
Honestly, like I said, I mean, when it came to everything CS wise, he was like, he didn't really do anything special. I mean, he genuinely is just, he just played, and he has no desire to, he doesn't like school, so he doesn't want to go to college. So, and without getting into too much detail, for him this was like a huge motivator. Like he knew he had to be successful, so he put his heart and soul into it. Like every match was do or die, and that caused him to have to be the best that he possibly could be. So he would always put insane amounts of time in. You know, he would grind. Like he's I mean, I would attribute him to the same thing that Get Right used to say. He used to talk about how he never saw himself as somebody that had like some natural talent. So, but he didn't sit there and mope about it. He just ended up putting more time in. And Grim was just Get Right in that sense of putting a bunch of time in, but he also had the natural talent. Like, at literally anytime I'd play any first person shooter game with him, he would just be insane at it. I mean, even when Fortnite first came out, like we played it, and that guy would get 20 kills a game. Like it was just insane. Like he's so good at every single FPS game that's ever existed. So he 100% just has like
just an insane talent.
The genetics, you know, he has
that
genetic talent.
Yeah. He has the esports gene.
Yes.
All right. Cool. So like obviously like probably your most famous stint is when you played with Chaos during the middle of 2020. Could you tell me a little bit about that experience? Like what was it like? You know, what do you is there anything you wish would have gone differently? I mean I'm sure there's plenty, but
yeah, so Chaos was pretty interesting because for me, I started when like Steel was kind of at his peak in streaming and like being a CS personality. So like, of course, I would watch all of Steel's YouTube videos because it was super funny and all that. So I looked up to him for a long time, and so getting to play with him was like, obviously crazy for me because I was like, I would go from looking up to this guy to now I'm just kind of shooting the shit with him in games and joking around with him like at an apartment in Arizona. Like I never would have saw myself at this point. But things I wish would have gone different was literally anybody who's followed me on Twitter or anything knows me as had bad anxiety, and which I'm now medicated for, which is that's the thing that I will say I wish I did before, because if I had the anxiety medication before I joined Chaos, like I would probably still, well, obviously seeing where Chaos is now, I probably wouldn't still be on the team because the team wouldn't exist, but I would have been on the team for significantly longer because I mean, I left. Like, I left of my own choice. Like, they wanted to keep working with me and they wanted to make things work because obviously they'd been plagued with roster issues, but like mental health wise, I couldn't do it anymore. I mean, just being there, I had gained 20 pounds, I think. Like, it was rough. So I realized I just needed to take a step back. But again, that all stemmed from the anxiety and everything. So I think that's the biggest thing I would have changed. But also, it really, really opened my eyes to the fact that like I didn't really have to think about anything CS wise, because the way that Steel called was very based on just default, and from there we kind of just play very reactionary, and because of that I kind of had the Grim syndrome that I talked about, where I didn't think that I was smart enough to make these decisions. Because in my head, I'm like, okay, why should I make a decision and go and do something of my own accord when I have, a world-class IGL with me? Like, I'm not going to do any, my idea is not going to be as good as his or whatever. But in reality, I mean, that's not the case 90% of the time. Like, the way CS works is, it doesn't even have to be the best possible idea, but if you do it together, there's a good chance it'll work. That's just how CS is, especially online CS. Like, you could make the worst decision possible, but if you just do it as a 5-man unit, like, it might work. So I think it really, really taught me that, like, I need to start thinking for myself more and just make my individual decisions and just kind of go for it. Because if not, like, if you just play super, super standard Counter-Strike the whole time, it's going to be super easy to play against you. Like, especially being an opera, like, you have to mix it up. You have to do these things. So I think,
and I mean, I think it's obviously that sucks, and it's good that you're open with things, exciting as well, because I think like that's something that's probably stopped or at least put a temporary, setback in a lot of careers. I mean, not just in
Oh
esports.
yeah.
I mean, it's something that happens in every field. And I mean, I can imagine the stress and the mental aspect of trying to go pro and playing pro CS is insane. I know a lot of people are super young and not probably not getting all the support that they would need to deal with these things. All right. So last or like actually one thing that's sort of interesting is like obviously you've played with a lot of the talents and you seem to have a pretty good eye for the talent. Like, is there any sort of rising stars in the NA scene that you think people should know about and that all the orgs that's hopefully looking into getting back into CS should pick up at this stage?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of unfortunate of a situation for Curry. Curry is one of one of the most selfless players in North America. Like on Triumph, he was the entry, and like literally at any point, like he would buy UMPs so Grim could have an AK. Like he would constantly make sure that like it was always the team first. But he ended up going to college, and because of that, he couldn't commit as much time as Triumph wanted him to. But I think that guy is like a key to have on any team. And I mean, as you can see, I'm pretty sure he's on Rebirth. It's Rebirth or Imperial. I think it's Rebirth, and he's been playing insanely well. Like he's just been destroying all these guys because, I mean, he's just a really really solid player. And I think it's a shame that things kind of happened the way they did. But I think he's like a very very good pickup for any org that's looking to try and get like an up and coming player or anything. I mean, same thing with some of the Bad News Bears guys. Like, although I wouldn't. I mean, it's hard to say that they're like an up and coming team because they debatably are probably better than some of the NA Pro teams. But obviously, apparently Alter's been doing really well on that roster. He's been somebody that I've has always kind of like stagnated at a certain spot in the scene, but it seems like he finally got a shot and he's been doing pretty well. So that's pretty cool to see. I think he's always kind of had that natural talent, similar to what some people would know Shot Up, who is currently, I think, on Envy for Valorant. But that, I mean, he would have like 20 hours in the past 2 weeks and just destroy everybody. Like that, he is genuinely one of the most naturally talented players that anyone's ever seen. Like you will never you can talk to any pro player, any MDL player, and no one will have a bad thing to say about Shot Up, and he's always just been
Yeah.
insanely good.
I can imagine reputations
Yeah.
go around quite easily. So, like, can we take a few community questions? Like, obviously, a lot of people, especially within our audience, is like sort of curious on like the different aspects of going pro. We had a question from like Get You, which asked sort of around and I suppose this differs from different tiers, but like what other kind of support maybe you get while you're in an organization in the professional contract scene? So like common or obviously some sort of salary, some sort of maybe housing and food accommodations, but like are there other supports that you regularly get, or is it only like the top organizations that maybe get like health, psychological, fitness support?
So you probably will not find any org that gives you anything other than financial support, like just salary, until you get to the tier one teams. Mainly just because budgeting is hard. I mean, Counter Strike, people don't think about this at all. Counter Strike's not profitable at all until you're a tier one team. Like, if you pick up an MDL team, you're not making money. Like, there's straight up, you're not making any money. So it's really hard for teams to, or for organizations to think about how in the world can I like add a sports psychologist into the mix, like, you know, team houses. Like, you really can't do that unless you have some other team that's just making millions and that you're able to just kind of throw some excess money at Counter-Strike. But I mean, if you're looking for a game where you're going to get pampered, Counter-Strike isn't it. You really got to work for it. You're not going to have these luxuries of like tier 4 league League of Legends teams who have team houses and everything. It's just not going to happen. Counter-Strike's a very, again, because
What do you think
Valve
is
isn't in
missing
it.
for like the Counter-Strike scene
Valve.
to have maybe more healthy grassroots scene?
Mhm.
It's Valve.
Yeah,
It's
it's
Valve.
Valve because, I mean, there's no money coming in from Valve, so you have no return on your money, right? The only return you have is if you make a major. And then even then, like the sticker money that you're going to make from it, it's not going to cover the costs of the a year and a half of the team of the money you just put in. So it's really really hard to get anything going unless Valve steps in. And the reason why these EU teams have all this stuff is because of betting. As my brother just said in the chat, betting is in EU is like the biggest reason why a lot of these orgs have the money they have. Hence why you have like Betway coming in with NIP. All these teams. I think Hellraisers recently had a sponsor that they put in their name when they were playing matches, and like all these things. It's because they can have betting sponsorships, but we can't in the US because it's illegal. Like it's banned. Valve made it to where you can't
Sure.
do that. So or not Valve, but you get what I'm saying. Essentially, you cannot bet in the U.S. legally.
Right.
So we can't. These orgs can't, like Cloud9 can't get a betting sponsorship because that's illegal for most of their fan base to be doing. So it doesn't make sense for them to promote that kind of stuff. So that's, I think, another big issue that we have in NA, at least. Like EU has a pretty good support for their teams, but it's really hard to get anything going as an NA organization. I mean, even Triumph is barely profitable, and they sold Me to Chaos and sold Grim to Liquid, and even then, at that point, they're like still breaking even barely. So it's like it's really hard to make any money, and like that's literally your hope as an org. A tier 2 org in North America is just you hope you have that next best player that you can sell to a higher tier organization.
Yeah, so it becomes like a talent development program.
Yeah,
all right.
much.
Hero 5K had a pretty interesting question on like what you would say is the best way to build more structure as a team.
I think the easiest way to do that is I kind of touched base a little bit on it earlier, but forcing when you're whoops, actually I muted my mic. When you're scrimming, forcing yourself to win by doing some sort of structure based thing. Like, don't sit there and go for individual plays in the scrim. Like, you can say, hey, listen, you might have these ideas. That's good. But I want us to practice entirely this scrim on just make sure that before you're going somewhere is just flash for yourself. Have somebody flash for you. Like, really work on doing things together. Like, don't make a decision and just run with it. If you make that decision, have somebody come and help you. Have somebody come and do something with you. The more you work together, it's going to help build your structure a bunch because it's going to start becoming subconscious. You're both going to see something and you're going to be like, hey, let's go do this. Or, let's go do that thing we did that one time. Like, hey, let's do our connector thing. And then eventually you'll just keep building and building and you'll keep coming up with these fun things and great things to do with your teammates. And like, I think that is an amazing way to build structure. But the very first step to that is you really need to have like respect for each other. Like if you don't have respect for your IGL or your teammates, like you're not gonna do that because you're gonna be like, oh well, I don't trust that if I bring this person over that they're gonna be able to do the right thing. Like you need to be able to have that trust for each other. So I think that's like the best way to build structure though is just literally force yourself to do things with your teammates and don't even make an individual play in the scrim. Just force yourself to do something, even if it doesn't work. Now you know not to do it, or maybe try it in a different scenario. Like, yeah. So I think that's the biggest thing.
I think that's super helpful. Even though there's probably a lot of people, myself included, like if you've seen the shit my friends do, you'd have a hard time trusting them. No, but all right. Cool. I just want to round out because like I think you have like unique insight to this, and like I can't remember who asked, but like it was a question around collegiate esports, and I mean obviously you now a little bit involved in collegiate esports. Like, what effects, and it's been like sort of an area that's growing a lot lately. There's a bunch of companies trying to go in and make collegiate esports a thing. Um, what sort of effect do you think this will have on like esports in NA?
I'm hoping that it can kind of become something similar to how like League of Legends currently is, where it the collegiate scene can be used as a pathway to pro. Like there are some, I believe there are some college players that are on, or league players that are on these college teams that are like looked at and scouted to instantly go into like pro teams or even tier two, which tier two in league is still insanely good. But I'm really hoping that CS can kind of come to that, because as of right now, a lot of the issues in NA come from mentality issues, and that comes with being young. I mean, when you're young, you're young and dumb. You don't really understand like the way you feel is not necessarily the most mature, and the way you take things out's not good. But if you go through the college system, if you even if you don't go through college, but you just mature, like that's why I think it's weird that people see somebody who's like 22, 23, and they're like, oh, they're old, they're washed. It's like at that point, that's when you're like, I think was it like 25, 26 when your brain's fully developed and you're like at your technical
Yeah,
peak.
your
It's like,
peak.
yeah, at that point, it's like, especially if you go through the the collegiate system is like you'll have to gain that maturity because you are held to very high standards in the collegiate scene. Like us being we're seen as varsity student athletes in the like in our program. So we do we do student athlete workouts. We again, we're treated like as if I was on the hockey team or the football team. Like we're seen as just the same thing. So because of that, like I think collegiate's a very, very good way to develop talent and really like round them out on a personality basis. Because like I said, attitude issues are the biggest issue in NACS, and I think if we can really get some like collegiate resources in there and get them through the system, like it's perfect.
Yeah. Obviously, it's a big step towards building some sort of
Mm-hmm.
sustainable grassroots scene. Cool. Well, we're gonna wrap up there so as not to keep you all night. I really, really appreciate you coming on, and I think a lot of people got a lot of great insight from this. I think you really touched upon some interesting points and some points that maybe people don't really think about. So I appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge and your experiences. Is there any sort of closing words you would like to say, or any shout outs, or any last thing you would like to cover?
No, I mean, oh, sorry, go ahead.
You're good. No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, obviously, shout out MTU Esports. If you don't already, follow them on Twitter. And of course, Mr. One Grim CS in the chat. Probably my best friend I've made from Counter Strike. So very happy to see you doing well out there. Of course, as always. And of course, I said a lot of wonderful things about you. Didn't say a single bad word about you. Don't worry.
Hopefully
Um,
caught them.
yeah, but other than that, I mean, I don't really have much. I appreciate you having me on. I really enjoy talking about these things, and I really wish uh, there's more of a focus on um, like having pros talk about the not just the, oh, how do I get better, how do I what's my good DM routine. It's like people need to focus on the mental aspect of the game, and I don't think pros really talk about that much, and I think it's why there's been an attitude issue. So just remember, it's very important to focus on your mental. Like your mental health is super important when it comes to Counter Strike. Counter Strike is 50% mental almost. So please, like, take care of yourself. Exercise, do what you got to do. Like, you got to make sure that you're happy inside and outside of the game. But other than that, I
Yeah.
don't think I have anything.
And maybe next time people are starting to gel at their teammates in matchmaking, they'll think about this
Yeah,
and
exactly.
take your advice. All
Mhm.
right, awesome. Thanks a lot. So we're going to wrap up there. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Voltage, for sharing your knowledge. And that's it.